Why do you play video games? To have fun! No, the correct answer is to win. In this life, there are two concrete states: winning and death. As a professional The Punch-Out guy, I've obviously never lost at anything in my life, and the closest I've come to it is losing my patience with you. A lot goes into the process of being good at video games, but top of the list has gotta be never challenge yourself. Losing means that it was pointless for you to even try in the first place. So when you're mapping out your road to never losing a video game, which inevitably leads to da honeys, you need to know all the major spots to hit. These are the games that separate the men from the babies, and I've never seen a baby pay income tax, so I know which side I'm on. Just as important as the spots to hit, though, are the spots to miss. These are the games that don't just stack the deck against you, it decks you in the jaw with an unwinnable situation. That's what we're talking about today. Games you don't have a chance of winning at. There's something really interesting to me about games that, either intentionally or not, can't be completed. And these are games that were meant to be beaten I'm talking about. If you want to extend the conversation back far enough, most arcade games like Pac-Man and Donkey Kong are unwinnable. You get far enough and the game goes to a kill screen. Those are interesting, but not exactly what I'm looking for. The same thing goes for games where you can make unwinnable situations for yourself. Sell all your key items, weapons, armor, what the hell, I can't beat this game! Soft locks and stuff of this nature isn't what I want to talk about. I'm talking about the hardcore stuff. Games that have endings that want you to reach a certain completion point, but through the fault of the game itself, or an unforeseen bug, can't be achieved. If you're a completion nut, feel free to use this as your enemies list to avoid at all costs. Now, when it comes to unwinnable games, you have two camps that you're working with. Those are your impossible to completes and your impossible to complete 100%. Let's start off with the standard ones, games that under normal circumstances can't be finished. A perfect example of this is Bumble Revolution on the DS, a game that really challenges the universal truth that the DS didn't have a Bubble game on it. It's a franchise that's existed for darn near 40 years, and any console worth its salt has a Bubble game on it. Evidently, the DS is worth a whole crapload of salt, so it was really just a matter of time. The game comes with two different modes, Classic and New Age mode, with Classic being an emulated version of the original Bubble, and New Age mode being a remake that adds in more hazards, enemies, and problems, like screen crunch that made enemies impossible to see. However, some concessions surely had to be made to pack in all that new content. Well, where the cuts were made were to the game's legs. A new addition in New Age mode is the boss fights that will appear every 10 levels, or in the case of level 30's boss, don't. How a problem like this even happens in the localization process, I have no idea, but while the game was being brought to America, a programming issue cropped up, which left the level 30 boss unable to spawn in. With the boss not being able to spawn in, that meant there was no way to get past level 30, and the game was rendered unwinnable. Bumble is meant to have a whopping 100 levels to it, but thanks to an oversight by the American distributor Codemasters, you're only able to play a third of the new mode, likely the reason you picked up the game at all. Seeing as the game didn't use a password system either, you couldn't even cheese your way past it with a code. Not even Action Replay could get you to about 69 of the game's other levels, since the only code they had was to get you to level 100. We know it was a Codemasters issue since the issue doesn't exist in the PAL or Japanese versions of the game, only in the American one, which Codemasters handled. As a way to rectify the issue, Codemasters issued a recall on copies of Bumble Revolution. and told affected players to ship their copies in so they could send them back a version that had the boss fight reinserted. They even included a copy of Rainbow Island Revolution as a make-good, but with the recall made about 4 months after the game launched, I do have to question how much good it really ended up doing. Considering there are going to be inherently less versions of the fixed Bubble Bobble Revolution in circulation, that means that buying a copy of the game is a gamble because you don't know whether or not it's going to be a fixed version or one of the original broken ones. A similar bug exists in the PSP game Tales of Eternia, where the game had a game-breaking glitch during a mid-game boss fight after 20 hours of play, where the PSP would freeze and make continuing impossible. Bandai Namco did reprint the game with the bug fixed, but didn't make the new version look any different from the original broken one, so they would sit side by side on a shelf, and you wouldn't know whether or not you were buying a fixed or broken version until you bought it and put it in your PSP. It is a hair bit more egregious with Bubble Bobble Revolution though, since this glitch doesn't come after 20 hours of gameplay, it comes after about 20 minutes of gameplay. And once you get to level 30, that's it. 2/3 of the game just completely inaccessible. All you would have to do to find out this glitch existed was just play the game. But with it being such a glaring flaw, one can only assume that no one at Codemasters was given the time to sit down and check out what is a very simple problem to see. A problem with a bit more of an interesting explanation comes in the form of Tokyo Extreme Racer 3. Tokyo Extreme Racer is a series of racing games developed by Genki, the company you might know as the developers of Spectrobe's Origins, as well as more experimental and cool fighting games, like the Kengo series and Fighter Destiny. The Tokyo Extreme Racer series, though, has a staggering 33 games under its belt, with the latest one not even out yet, and set for a release in 2025. Another weird note about the game is that it was constantly changing names and publishers in the few times it ever made the westward transition. You've got Konami, who call it Street Supremacy, Ubisoft, who called it Import Tuner Challenge, Jellicoe and THQ, who called it Tokyo Highway Battle, and the series' most frequent collaborators, Crave Entertainment, who decided to keep the original Japanese name of Tokyo Extreme Racer. The game itself is a really well put together street racing game that has a lot of mechanical depth behind it. From what I've seen, this isn't even the most complicated the Tokyo Extreme series gets, so if you're on board for an immersive car sim that is a lot more Gran Turismo than Mario Kart, it's not a bad game to check out. I was really surprised to find out just how much fun it can be, and how rewarding it is to win with a car that you have so much control over. And the game's central gimmick of having no racetracks, but rather a big interconnected city that can act as a racetrack wherever, is really cool. However, playing this game comes at a heavy cost, as if you try to play it as it comes out of the box, you're never gonna beat it. Remember how I mentioned Crave Entertainment and how they were the series' most frequent publishers in the West? Well, this game is a showcase of their localization team at their worst, as Extreme Racer 3 has a horrible translation job. Now, it is almost passable in stuff like the game translating the 13 Devils Gang as the 13 Ogre Military Officials, but when it starts messing with gameplay, it becomes a big problem. The translation is really bad in some portions. The story of the game is borderline incoherent as sentences are stringed along with gibberish. However, the game's biggest sin doesn't come from the translation of dialogue, it comes from the final boss. See, the game is structured around racing around these large interconnected cities, hunting down rivals, beating them, and then luring out the bosses of the gangs to take them out in a race. Another system, though, are the Wanderers, drivers who don't have a gang to call their own, and are instead lone wolves who will race you for their own reasons. Wanderers won't accept a race against you either, unless you fulfill their conditions first. and these can range from beating a certain amount of other racers, having a certain car unlocked, or fighting them at a certain time of day. And considering the game runs off the PS2's internal clock, that can mean waking up at midnight to try to get a shot at one. You need to beat all the Wanderers before the final boss of the game is unlocked, and here's where the translation issues come into play. See, one of the Wanderers is Whirlwind Fanfare, and to face her, you have to max out the game's currency to the highest it will go, 100 million credits. While that is an annoying amount of money, it isn't unreasonable since the game does give you a multiplier based on how many races you've won in a row. This isn't even the only Wanderer in the game who runs a money check before you can fight them, as Exotic Butterfly needs you to get 20 million credits before they'll fight you. So it's gonna take a while, but the path forward is clear enough. All you gotta do is race in high-profile races, never lose a single one, and after enough time has passed, you'll have the money. Well, the issues begin once you do reach that credit cap, and realize it's only 99,999,990 credits. You are exactly 10 credits off from getting to fight Whirlwind Fanfare, and there's no way in the game to legitimately earn the extra 10 credits. The game can't count past the limit it's at now. Without the additional money, you can't fight Whirlwind Fanfare, and you can't unlock the final driver, making the game's key mode completely unfinishable. How does a problem like this even happen? How does the game work fine, but funky up until the very last second, where the wheels fall off? Well, to explain that, we're gonna need to do what we do best in races: cut corners. It all comes down to the conversion from Japanese yen to US dollars. The two currencies are not at all parallel with each other, and an outrageous sounding amount of yen won't sound that bad when converted to USD. Hearing Yuji Naka was busted for using insider trading to buy 144 million yen worth of illegal stocks sounds ludicrous. Hearing he only bought $1 million worth of illegal stock is... well, it's not better, but the number's smaller. The team at Crave saw how the credits in-game used the yen value of the parts and cars, and thought it would look ridiculous in America, starting a game with $4 million and then being told, buy one of those piece of shit junk cars. But if they started with $40,000, that was a lot more reasonable. So the choice was made to simply reduce the credits' value to only 1/100th of their original yen value. It's not an incorrect conversion rate, but the problem comes from how this change completely ruined the requirements to fight Whirlwind Fanfare. Japanese versions of the game have no issue getting to the fight, but as for American versions of the game, nope. The conversion rate change completely screws up the in-game counter, and leaves Whirlwind as always $10 away from a proper fight. Now, unlike before, Action Replay actually can help you out, and give you the ability to race Whirlwind and the boss that follows her. And even more recently, in 2024, a patch was made available online for those emulating the game, otherwise known as Everyone. This will adjust the NTSC version's counter to let you get the additional money, beat Whirlwind Fanfare, and challenge the final boss. For a change seemingly as minor as applying a conversion rate to the in-game currency, the choice to remove a few zeros from the ending of the money total without changing either Whirlwind's required money amount or the currency cap in-game leaves a game I think is ripe for a hardcore community to gravitate towards, in a state where no one would dare try it, given how there's no prize at the end. Sometimes games don't start out as unplayable, but slowly become so over time, thanks to problems the devs never considered because they can't see the future. Poor excuse, if anything, but it does at least explain why Spider-Man from Neversoft is unplayable on PC anymore. Right up there with Spider-Man 2, Spider-Man 2, and the great Spider-Man 2, Spider-Man is one of the most beloved games in the series. And when people look for retro Spider-Man games, this is the first one they flock to. Where they're flocking to, though, is usually the version on PlayStation, released in 2000. Or if they're f***ing cool, they'll play the Dreamcast version from May of 2001. However, in September of 2001, a Windows port of the game would be released. And unlike the other versions, it received just okay reviews. A lot of outlets expected some major improvements from the console versions, and were left burnt out when it was just as good. One thing they didn't mention, however, was that the game is not completable. Probably because when they played it, it was. See, with the advancement of technology, not enough attention was paid to how it would affect Spider-Man, and as a result, the game became unwinnable if you play on PC. How it works is that the game was meant to be played at 20 frames per second, which was around the standard that a 2001 PC could handle. Nowadays, though, 30 and 60 FPS have become the standard, and PCs have gotten stronger to accompany that. However, older games like Spider-Man never put a cap on what their FPS could be because it seemed impossible for a game to even get close to that. Certain actions in the game that were tied to the frame rate suddenly started to glitch out, like the laser attack in the Mysterio boss fight. If the frame rate isn't capped, the game will fire the lasers way too fast, and make the boss fight nearly impossible. Nearly impossible isn't what we're looking for, though. And that's in a boss fight. There's some dignity in a guy simply beating you to death. In the cutscene where Spider-Man tries to rescue J. Jonah Jameson from the Scorpion, he's meant to crash through this window here and make the save. On PC, though...
Leave him alone, Chuckles.
Okay, cut. Spider-Man, you okay? Okay, so what's going on here? Why is Spider-Man caught in a perpetual blooper reel? Well, the explanation is... really silly. See, during cutscenes, characters are programmed to act how you would expect. They have their preset motions they go through that are hard-coded into their code. This applies to every character, save for Spider-Man. During cutscenes, his scripting is just the game controlling him the same way the player would, with a set of pre-programmed motions that will play out the scene correctly. That's where the issues start to crop up, because it means that he's still bound to the rules of the game's engine, meaning that Spider-Man can die during cutscenes like he would during the game. Of course, this never comes up, because the controls are programmed in a way where Spider-Man's never gonna be put in a fatal situation. Except if you say, run the game at a frame rate it was never intended to. Yes, at any frame rate above the game's native 20 FPS, Spider-Man's control scripting gets messed up, causing him to veer off to the side and crash into the window instead of crashing through it. Spider-Man then falls to his death, causing the cutscene to restart. Crash, die, restart, crash, die, restart. If you can manage to get past this by mashing the skip cutscene button, you're still out of luck, as later on in the next mission, Spider-Man will have to swing off this crate that he's falling from to a skyscraper. Except for the same reason, Spider-Man won't swing in time, and instead plummet to his death. A non-skippable cutscene that stops all progress dead in its tracks. One problem caused by the uncapped frame rate that isn't fatal, but still affects gameplay, is during the Chase Venom mission, where the frame rate screwiness messes with a cutscene that ends up affecting gameplay. During the mission, there's a brief cutscene that plays where Spider-Man and Venom run through a building, and at the end, you're both meant to leap out to continue the chase. But because of the frame rate screwiness, instead Spider-Man will be facing the wall and not outside, which means that you'll be clinging to it, and that gives Venom a huge head start. This makes the window to catch up to him infinitesimal, and will lead to a game over 99% of the time unless you have perfect timing. Now, this isn't impossible to fix. As an advancement that comes from those better computers is the ability to manually cap out frame rates, so you can keep the game tied to its original 20 FPS and eliminate the problems. That doesn't really mean much though to the thousands of people who to this day recall the PC port of Spider-Man as being completely unwinnable. It's technically an out-of-game resource, so unless you know to cap out the frame rates before you start playing, you're done, you're screwed, you're never gonna win. A similar occurrence happens in the Xbox port of True Crime New York City. During the mission Human Cargo, a boss fight happens on top of a shipping crate where you need to shove this guy to the edge before throwing him off. In the Xbox version though, the prompt to finish him never shows up, which means you can't win the fight, and as it's a story-critical mission, there's no way to complete the game. It has since been found that there is a way to throw the guy off, but it's via an extremely precise button input that most people won't be able to land, let alone know is there since there's still no prompt from the game. The only evidence I can find online that this is even possible comes from a speedrunner of the game PMC Trilogy. It is theoretically possible to beat the guy and win the mission, but most, if not all players, are gonna mess up and never be able to finish the game. At least in True Crime though, the mission is beatable through purely in-game means. You gotta put in the extra legwork to patch up Spider-Man, which to me makes it more egregious. A particularly funny group of unwinnable games are actually closely related to the Spider-Man example, in that they were completable at one point, but thanks to the ravages of time, have been left with no way to complete them. These aren't due to any shoddy programming though, but rather because they relied on outside resources that no longer work. Now, for two of these three examples, workarounds do exist, as the resources you'd access would simply give you a hint or a code that can still be accessed via looking it up online. But if you're looking purely at what's in the game, you can't beat them with what's there. The first one is one of the most famous examples of a phenomenon like this, Star Tropics. Released in 1990, Star Tropics has a lot of features to it that make it very distinct when it comes to the NES's lineup, like being one of the only Nintendo-made games to never be released in Japan, or for being extremely difficult, even by NES standards. One such instance of difficulty comes from one of the game's elements that predates ARG culture by years by having the player interact with an out-of-game element to advance. Partway through the game, you'll be prompted by one of the island's inhabitants to dunk the letter your uncle sent you into water, in order to get a code you can punch into your transmitter to advance in the game. Now, that makes sense, but there's no note from your uncle in the game. What are you supposed to do? The way this was meant to be done was by looking in the instruction manual, since every copy of Star Tropics came with a physical letter from your uncle. Once you find it, you have to soak it in water, which will reveal the transmitter code written in invisible ink. As far as puzzles go, this has gotta be one of the most inventive from this generation of games. But if Star Tropics ever wants to be re-released on digital consoles, how are they gonna handle the trick? Luckily, enough love and attention was paid to the game's release on the Wii and Wii U's virtual consoles that they found a clever workaround. In each of the game's electronic manuals, they would include a copy of the letter that came with the original version of the game. They'd also include some method to reveal the letter's secret message, and in the Wii version, it included an adorable animation of the message being dunked in water. However, for the game's latest re-release on the Switch's online service, virtual manuals were done away with, and without a guide, you have no way of finding out what the code is. It speaks to a real lack of effort when it comes to the port, when every other one found a way to implement the message, except this one. A similar out-of-game resource can be found in Who Framed Roger Rabbit on NES. The game gives you a phone number to call, which is meant to have you call the actual phone number in order to get a hint from Jessica Rabbit. Only problem now is that the number is out of service. So if you want to find out exactly where to go, you're gonna have to look up a guide, as without it, there's nothing you can do. There is no resource in the game to tell you the information Jessica was supposed to. Let's just say out of curiosity though, you call the phone line. What happens then?
We're sorry. You have reached a number that has been disconnected or is no longer in service.
I was promised sex. Yeah, infamously for a while in the early 2000s, the phone number that was shown in-game had been purchased and used by a phone sex hotline. Still accessible as recently as 2014. Happy 10th birthday to not being able to get phone sex from a Nintendo game! The saddest one of all has to come from Simon the Sorcerer 3D. This was the third entry into the point-and-click adventure series that parodied fantasy elements in a similar vein to the Discworld series. The series developers, AdventureSoft, have had a long history of publishing both video games as well as traditional RPG books and choose-your-own-adventure books. Simon the Sorcerer was their biggest cash cow, though, as it had 9 entries spanning the point-and-click genre to pinball games, puzzle games, and the 3D adventure, Simon the Sorcerer 3D. This was the series' big step into the adventure style of games, and it was their first kick in the pants right back to point-and-click, as it was critically drubbed by the media of the time. AdventureSoft president Mike Woodruff even admitted in an interview that the move from 2D to 3D was a big mistake, and caused the series to go into hiatus for 5 years, until 2007 with the marginally better received Simon the Sorcerer 4. Who knows how much worse the game could have reviewed, though, if they had played the game's 2021 Steam re-release. In line with the series' fourth wall-breaking humor, the final stretch of the game takes place as the universe begins breaking down, and the only way to avert it is to fix the computer that controls the universe. You hop around from motherboard to motherboard, watching as the world breaks down to its base wireframes until you reach the final puzzle of the game, which isn't really much of a puzzle. The game doesn't give you so much as a hint on what to do next, but what you're supposed to do is press the actual disk drive button on your computer. That will open the disk drive on the computer in the game, which will let you swap disks and finish the game. That's a funny little joke. Alright, let's just press the disk drive button on the front of my computer that has a disk for Simon the Sorcerer 3D in it, and we'll be good to... Alright. So, computers haven't been made with disk drives in them for a while now, which means it's very likely you don't have one to begin with. In the event you do have one, or have an external disk drive that you can plug in via USB, you're still out of luck, because you need to eject the Simon the Sorcerer 3D disc, which you don't have because this is the Steam version. So how are you supposed to beat Simon without the ability to interact with its own gimmick? Well, to do that, you have to go to www.youtube.com and pay tribute to Andrea Panocchia, who uploaded a full game walkthrough of Simon 3D and has the ending for you to watch. There are people who claimed you can download a program that simulates the signal a disk drive opening sends to your computer to trick the game into thinking a disk drive's been opened, but that actually brings up a great point. This isn't a new issue. The game looks for that signal that a computer is sent when a disk drive opens. But not all computers use the same signal, which means that on certain older computers, you could open the disk drive 100 times, but nothing's gonna happen. I think this has gotta be the first game ever to be unbeatable for the same reason, and also 2 separate reasons at the same time. But what's worse than getting your legs cut out from under you on the final lap? Getting them cut out from under you on your victory lap. Some games can be beaten no problem, not a single issue had from the beginning to the end. But it's once you start shooting for 100% completion that the game plays its hand and backstabs you with a game-ending problem. A game I've been playing a lot recently that actually hit me with this exact problem was Just Cause 2. Now, that isn't to say I've only just started playing Just Cause 2 recently. I think you can see I've played quite a lot. I think Just Cause 2 is the greatest open world game of all time, beating out confusingly, Just Cause 3 and 4. If you forced me to only play one game for the rest of my life, I'm not kidding when I say Just Cause 2 solos the rest easy. With so much to do in this game though, the idea of 100%ing it was always kind of insane to me. Most open world games put that sort of completion in as a joke for when you've collected 500 little trinkets. Breath of the Wild shits in your hand and expects a thank you. Open world games are never on my radar for completion. But once you beat the main campaign of Just Cause 2, you unlock Mercenary Mode, where every time you collect an item or destroy something, you get an update on how close you are to 100% completion. Oh, so the developers are trying to goad you into completing the game. Well, with this, you think it would be a slow and steady trip around the island, looking for all the loose collectibles and undestroyed statues that would get you to 100%. Except, by the time you've collected every faction item, destroyed every government item in the game, and completed everything you possibly can, you will have, at most, 99.95% completion. Now, what the f***? I believe I am owed a victory at this point, so where exactly can I collect it? Well, to find that, we need to find the rest of the items that are missing in our lineup of collectibles. And this includes a single water tower and 6 collectible gun and car upgrades. The gun and car upgrades are pretty easy to figure out why they're missing, since the game gives you 3 of each whenever you beat a main story mission. But since Mission 6 ends as Mission 7 begins, the game just never gives you them, which means you're eternally 6 upgrades short. The water tower, meanwhile, is simply bugged and doesn't exist anywhere accessible in the game. It might be hidden under the map or in some obscure location, but I've scanned the entire island and it's nowhere to be found. This leaves only 7 collectibles that can't be collected in a game with nearly 6,500 different collectibles and destructible objects. Now, as grim as these metrics sound, getting your run put to an end by only 7 collectibles, mods have existed for a while for the PC version of the game that put back in the offending collectibles. And with that, I say farewell, Mr. Tower, and hello to my 100% completion! Oh, right, I'm still not even close. Well, what's 1,000 more hours? I'm not going anywhere. Space Station Silicon Valley is an even worse case, since it's from a genre where the whole point is collecting everything. Developed by DMA Designs, who you may know better as the, Damn, they really don't have a funny game, do they? Lemmings, they're the Lemmings guys. Space Station Silicon Valley sees you controlling a microchip that can possess robot animals to platform around and collect purple orbs, all to fix your spaceship and get off the station. Despite selling fairly poorly for a platformer on the N64, the game garnered critical acclaim from many reviewers of the day for its original concept, incredible music, and tight controls. It's unknown, however, how well it would have scored if any of them had tried to complete the game 100%, as they would have found it to be impossible. See, the game measures your completion by a few different metrics, like how many different robot animals you take over, and how many purple orbs you collect. There are also commemorative trophies you can unlock by completing all there is to do in an area, and those count towards your completion percentage. The game doesn't require 100% completion to finish, but it's a collect-a-thon. If you don't get everything, then it's just a thon. Well, Fat Bear Mountain presents a problem that there's no way around. See, you do a little puzzle, a trophy pops up, you go to get the trophy, and you realize ghosts are real. The trophy is completely uncollectible. Any attempt to get it will result in you phasing right through it with no way to pick it up. Without this trophy, a legitimate 100% save file is impossible to get. And due to the game's low sales that I mentioned earlier, a second printing of the cartridge that could have addressed the issue was never made, meaning the only way to access the game's hidden minigame you unlock for 100% completion is either via a Game Shark or a cheat code. Honestly, given the game's style of humor and developers' unfortunate condition, I could have bought it if somebody told me they were just screwing with the players and added a trophy that couldn't be collected. Like that one chocolate piece from Conker's Bad Fur Day that Rare added in just as a way to piss people off who wanted to collect it. This is a game where your worthless human co-pilot sells the ending cutscene to afford a new spaceship after all. Shockingly though, we do actually have the full story thanks to a developer coming forward to explain it. Enter Daniel Layden, programmer at DMA Design and recipient of the Bug of the Year Award for his work on Space Station Silicon Valley. See, each of the trophies you can collect in-game is based on an asset in the level you find them in. And on Fat Bear Mountain, it's this faucet. The collision data on that faucet, though, wasn't working quite right. So Daniel removed it so he could give the faucet custom collision data. Seeing as the two shared collision properties, this left the level tap getting new collision information, while the trophy tap was left with nothing. As a result, the tap can't be collected, and the game can't be finished. It is frustrating that the game can't be finished as it was intended, but there's something really humanizing about the mistake when you hear it explained like that. I'm not exactly perfect or anything, so I can't be too harsh on him, and just like the Just Cause 2 example, this doesn't break the game like the other ones I've talked about. It's more just a funny relic of a decades-old screw-up now. Now as for the final non-100%able game, we're going to have to go back to a generation that somehow feels older than the N64, despite being more current. Guitar Hero. It was a fad, but what a fad it was. These games infected the cultural mainstream like no other. In a time when gaming was more gimmick-based than it had ever been, Guitar Hero was the one that rose to the top and became a staple of pop culture. Everyone had a plastic guitar, and everybody had a hell of a time trying to figure out where they could get rid of them once they wore out their welcome. Some people, though, never got tired of them, and have continued to play to this very day, in apps like Clone Hero that allow you to play custom songs with ridiculously high requirements. The skill required to play at a level like this is borderline inhuman, and anybody who can perform this well is more than deserving of praise. However, where we're going is where human skill starts to butt up against technical limitations. See, there's an unlockable song in Guitar Hero 2 you can unlock by paying $550. Once you start to play the song on Expert, though, there's gonna be a string of notes towards the end that completely blindsides you. There are about 17 notes back to back in such rapid succession that the game can't keep up with it. But wait, this isn't the fastest song in Guitar Hero, right? Surely Fire in the Flames has to beat this one out just for how crazy it is. Well, you have a point, but there are two reasons the Guitar Hero 2 song is unbeatable, while Fire in the Flames is simply really, really hard. Fire in the Flames is a very fast song. But compare the distance between notes in Fire in the Flames to the Guitar Hero 2 song. In Fire in the Flames, it's narrow, but there is an actual gap between notes that gives you the chance to hit the next one while strumming. With the Guitar Hero 2 song, though, there straight up is no gap, which means that the time to input the next note is razor thin. This actually plays great with the secondary reason the Guitar Hero 2 song is impossible: strum limits. See, the game has to keep up with a lot of quick inputs, but even it can get overwhelmed with too many of them in rapid succession. As a result, a strum limit was introduced that starts to ignore inputs after a while to give the game a breather. The strum limit in Guitar Hero 2 is around 15 notes per second, and any more than that in a single second is impossible for the game to keep up with. As you can remember, the Guitar Hero 2 song has 17 notes in about a second, which means that no matter how fast you strum, no matter how quick your fingers are, or how precise your play is, it is technically impossible to clear this song. And I don't mean technically like how I'm technically not a millionaire by writing a blank check to myself. I mean technically like it's not technologically possible to clear the song. The human limit of nailing 17 frame-perfect inputs back to back is just impossible, and the Guitar Hero 2 song can't be beaten in a single combo. But that only really tells the story for Guitar Hero on the Xbox 360 and PlayStation 2 in America, because believe it or not, we have another region-locked unbeatable game. Now, the technical explanation for this is complicated. Better explained by a Guitar Hero veteran, but what it comes down to is how European TVs work, with the PAL version of the game giving you an extra frame to work with when it comes to the strum limit. It upgrades the strum limit to around 17 notes per second, making the European PS2 version of Guitar Hero 2 the only version of the game that you can 100%. If you're wondering about the European Xbox 360 version, then sorry, but that one's not gonna work. The Xbox 360 has a standardized hertz limit across NTSC and PAL, which would negate the strum limit change. Again, I can't explain it flawlessly, but that's the general gist. Because of how the game reads inputs, this song in Guitar Hero 2 is too fast and therefore unwinnable. Oh, right, you haven't actually heard which song I'm talking about. All of this talk about the song itself and you still have no idea what it is. Well, if you're hardcore into Guitar Hero, you probably know, but the song that caused all this trouble is... It's Trogdor the Burninator! The heavy metal version of the song from Homestar Runner is the one that killed any chance of Guitar Hero 2 being beatable in NTSC regions and on the Xbox 360. Homestar was just a little bit before my time, but it's still so funny to see how many games either reference or straight up have content from it in their game. Like Xenoblade Chronicles, where one of Ricky's arts is called Burninate, or Baldi's Basics, which is a little more blunt. In fact, given how much Trogdor shares in common with other songs that have been made by the community, with the intent of purposely being unbeatable and just a way to troll professionals, maybe Trogdor was made this way on purpose as a sort of official troll song. There is a similar song in the Rock Band series called Green Grass and High Tides by the band The Outlaw that suffers from the exact same problem as Trogdor, but frankly, given the choice between the two, Trogdor is going to get my attention. It's not like the explanation is any different, but this one's a lot funnier. Nowadays, unwinnable games are few and far between. If they do come out, they're usually just shovelware thrown onto Steam without much thought. Nowadays, developers can just send out a patch that fixes any bug immediately. I'm not gonna tell you unwinnable games are some sort of good thing, but they certainly make for an interesting topic of discussion, figuring out why exactly they can't be beat, if it ever came to the developer's notice, how they responded to it, if the game ever got fixed. There's a lot that can be learned from unwinnable games. It's a good thing that they're gone because, imagine spending $70 on a game and then you can't even beat it, but I'll always have a soft spot for them.